My wife showed up to my tournament wearing another man's jersey. She doesn't know I'm competing. My wife Alyssa always told me that gaming was pathetic, that it was for losers with no future. So for 2 years, I've been lying to her, saying I'd been working night shifts at a warehouse when the truth is, I'd been going to a friend's house, training and competing in gaming tournaments. I know how that sounds, but you have to understand, I genuinely thought she'd leave me if she found out. But I swore this time after this tournament, I would take her out to a fancy place and tell her that I loved her and I loved gaming. The night before, I told my wife I had work and would be out all evening. She smiled at me. No problem. I'll be out this weekend at a spa with my sister anyway. However, 5 minutes ago, I just watched her enter the gaming venue and sit in the crowd. My mind instantly started racing as I sat in my gaming chair. She knew my secret, and I was doomed. But then I saw the smile on her face and thought, maybe she came here to support me. Maybe she wasn't as against gaming as I thought, and it made me feel warm inside. But just before the match started, I watched her slip on a jersey, the enemy team's jersey, and I felt my heart drop into my stomach. I flinched every time she yelled stuff like, "Let's go, baby! You got this!" acting all passionate toward my rival. My focus was instantly shattered. I started missing shots I wouldn't normally miss. I wasn't communicating with my team at all, and it didn't take long for the enemy team to absolutely dominate us. My teammates called a timeout the moment they noticed I was completely off. "Dude, what's wrong with you?" my teammate Jake asked. I couldn't answer. I just kept staring at Alyssa in the crowd while she stared lovingly at the other guy, blowing kisses at him, something she never once did for me. My team got more frustrated the more we started falling behind. When our opponents were 4 points away from winning, my team called in a second timeout. This time, Jake followed my phase and saw me eyeing a woman. "Are you really going to sit here and be distracted by some chick?" he complained. I replied quietly, "That's my wife." The whole team went silent. They looked at me, then at her, then up at the scoreboard. I could see it clicking for them. They realized I wasn't just playing bad. I was just emotionally destroyed by the person who should have been supporting me the most. Without saying anything else, my teammates rallied around me. One of them slammed his hand against my back and said, "Let's crush them." 3 simple words that woke me up instantly. We huddled up and started devising completely new strategies, refusing to go down without a fight. We came back hungry for a win, more determined than we ever were before. We played unpredictably, aggressively, while I channeled all the pain into focus. The enemy's score hadn't moved for almost half an hour, and at some point, we were finally neck at neck. Alyssa had fallen quiet. Other fans around her sat still, too shocked to cheer. And then, we won. The moment I brought down the final guy, I felt the tears spill instantly. My entire team screamed out, tugging at my jersey, but I just pulled them all into a hug. When the victory ceremony started, I stood on the stage staring at Alyssa while I made my speech. I'm thankful my team had my back, when my wife didn't. She completely froze as the cameras searched the crowd and placed her face on the big screen for everyone to see. She panicked and ducked, weaving through the crowd to leave. That's when her secret boyfriend from the enemy team shouted at me, "Wait, that's your wife? She told me she was single." "Yeah, well, she told me she hated gaming," I said, disappointed. The crowd quickly figured out what happened. That my wife came to the tournament wearing an enemy jersey, cheering against her own husband the whole match, and they didn't like it one bit. People began booing at her, throwing popcorn and drinks over her head while she tried to get away. But just as she reached the exit, the crowd blocked it. That's when she lost it, screaming at me that I was a liar too, that I was supposed to be at work. I lied, worried you'd leave me. You just straight up cheated. What's your excuse? It was only once, she argued. But just as she said that, one guy in the audience stood up looking completely devastated and yelled out, "You said you were dating me too last tournament." Everyone's eyes turned to her to see what she'd say next. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out at first. Her face went from pale to red as hundreds of people stared at her waiting for an explanation. The second guy who claimed she dated him stood there with his arms crossed, looking betrayed and angry. Alyssa finally stammered something about it being a misunderstanding, but her voice was too quiet and shaky for most people to hear. Someone near her yelled for her to speak up. She tried again, louder this time, saying the second guy was just a friend, and he misunderstood their relationship. The crowd didn't buy it. People started shouting questions at her, asking how many guys she was seeing and if she had any shame. I stood frozen on the stage, gripping the trophy so hard my knuckles turned white. My teammates had their hands on my shoulders, trying to keep me steady as the whole venue watched this nightmare unfold. The big screen still showed Alyssa's face blown up huge for everyone to see. She looked around desperately for an escape route, but the crowd had her boxed in near the exit. Security guards in yellow vests started pushing through the crowd toward her. The venue staff looked stressed and confused about how to handle this situation. My rival from the enemy team stood near his teammates looking shocked and hurt. He kept shaking his head like he couldn't believe what was happening. Jake squeezed my shoulder and leaned close to my ear. He told me we should get off the stage before this got worse. I nodded, but my legs felt heavy and weird. The announcer tried to regain control by thanking everyone for coming and saying the ceremony was over. Nobody paid attention to him. All eyes stayed on Alyssa as security finally reached her and started clearing a path. She ducked her head and let them guide her toward a side exit away from the main doors. The crowd parted reluctantly as security pushed through with Alyssa between them. People kept yelling things at her, but the guards blocked anyone from getting too close. I watched her disappear through a door marked staff only. The moment she was gone, the crowd's attention snapped back to me standing on stage. Phones pointed in my direction now. People started recording videos and taking pictures. The murmurs got louder as everyone processed what they just witnessed. My teammates surrounded me and started moving me toward the backstage area. Jake had his hand on my back, guiding me, while another teammate grabbed my gear bag. The walk off stage felt like it took forever, even though it was probably only 30 seconds. Reporters tried to shout questions at me, but my teammates formed a wall and kept them back. We pushed through a heavy door into a hallway behind the stage. The noise from the venue became muffled. My ears were ringing and my chest felt tight. One of my teammates asked if I was okay, but I couldn't answer. We kept walking until we reached the locker room area. It was a basic space with benches and lockers and fluorescent lights that hurt my eyes. My teammates sat me down on a bench and someone handed me a water bottle. I stared at it in my hands without drinking. Jake sat down next to me without saying anything. The other guys hovered around asking questions I couldn't process. Someone said I played amazing in the second half. Another person said not to worry about what just happened. Their voices blended together into background noise. I sat there watching my hands shake while holding the water bottle. The cold plastic felt real, but everything else seemed fake and distant. Jake stayed quiet beside me, which I was grateful for. I didn't want anyone trying to fix this or tell me it would be okay. The sounds from the venue filtered through the walls, muffled cheering and music as they probably started cleaning up. My breathing slowly got more normal. The tight feeling in my chest loosened a little bit. One teammate sat on the bench across from me and said I should take my time. Another guy started packing up equipment, trying to give me space. I finally opened the water bottle and took a small sip. My throat was dry and the water helped. Jake shifted beside me but still didn't speak. I appreciated him just being there without making it weird. The locker room felt safe and quiet compared to the chaos outside. I knew I'd have to face everything eventually, but right now I just needed to breathe and process. My phone was in my bag, buzzing constantly. I could hear it vibrating against my gear. Part of me wanted to check it, but a bigger part knew it was Alyssa, and I wasn't ready for that. I took another sip of water and stared at the floor tiles. They were white with gray speckles. I counted the speckles on one tile, then another. It gave my brain something to focus on besides replaying what just happened. After sitting there for maybe 15 minutes, I stood up. My legs felt more solid now. I told Jake I needed to pack my stuff and get out of here. He nodded and asked if I wanted him to drive me. I said yes without thinking about it. The idea of being alone in my car right now felt impossible. My teammates started gathering their gear too. Someone mentioned getting food, but nobody seemed hungry. We were all just going through the motions of post-tournament routine, even though nothing felt routine. I made myself focus on packing my bag. Mouse, keyboard, headset, cables. Each item went into its spot. The familiar actions helped ground me. Jake stood nearby, keeping an eye on me without being obvious about it. I zipped up my bag and slung it over my shoulder. The trophy sat on the bench where someone had set it down. I picked it up and looked at it. First place. We actually won. The victory felt hollow and strange now. But we did win. My team pulled together when it mattered. I held on to that thought as we headed toward the exit. A tournament coordinator stopped us in the hallway. She looked stressed and apologetic. She said I needed to do a quick interview for the broadcast. It was required by tournament rules. I wanted to say no, but Jake gave me a look that said I should just get it over with. The coordinator led me to a small room set up with cameras and lights. A reporter stood there with a microphone looking uncomfortable. I sat in the chair they pointed to and tried to arrange my face into something normal. The lights felt hot on my skin. The reporter asked basic questions about the match and our comeback. I gave short answers about teamwork and staying focused under pressure. He asked what was going through my head during the final round. I said my team had my back and that made all the difference. He seemed to want me to mention what happened with Alyssa, but I didn't take the bait. I kept my answers about the game and about being honest with the people who matter. The reporter looked disappointed but didn't push it. After maybe 5 minutes, they said we were done. I stood up fast and headed for the door. My face felt hot and I knew I was probably red. Jake was waiting in the hallway and we walked quickly toward the exit. Other players and staff watched us pass. Some looked sympathetic, others looked curious. I kept my eyes forward and kept walking. We pushed through the back doors into the parking lot. The cool evening air hit my face and I took a deep breath. Jake's car was parked near the back. We threw our gear in the trunk and got in. He started the engine but didn't pull out right away. My phone had been buzzing the entire time we walked to the car. I finally pulled it out and looked at the screen. 23 missed calls from Alyssa. 37 text messages. I scrolled through the preview of the texts without opening them. The first ones were asking where I was. Then they got angry saying I embarrassed her. Then they switched to saying we needed to talk. Then back to angry saying I had no right to kick her out of the venue. The messages kept coming even as I watched. Another text appeared asking why I wasn't answering. I felt my jaw clench. Jake glanced over and asked if I was okay. I said I needed to silence my phone. I went into settings and put it on Do Not Disturb. Then I shoved it deep into my bag so I wouldn't be tempted to look at it again. Jake asked if I wanted to grab food or just head to his place. I said his place. The idea of being in public at a restaurant felt impossible. He nodded and pulled out of the parking lot. We drove in silence for a while. The streetlights passed by outside. My brain kept replaying moments from the tournament, seeing Alyssa in that jersey, her cheering for the other team, the look on her face when the big screen showed her, the second guy standing up, her trying to explain. All of it played on loop in my head. Jake's apartment was small but clean. He cleared some space on his couch and grabbed me a blanket and pillow. He asked if I wanted to talk, but I shook my head. He said okay and told me to help myself to anything in the fridge. Then he went to his room and closed the door. I sat on the couch still wearing my team jersey. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I pulled out my phone even though I knew I shouldn't. The do not disturb was still on, but I could see the notifications stacking up. 52 texts from Alyssa now. I opened my messages and typed out a text without reading hers. I said we needed to meet tomorrow at the coffee shop on campus at 2 o'clock. I said she should stay somewhere else tonight. I hit send before I could second guess it. Her response came back in less than a minute. She said I had no right to kick her out of her own apartment. She said this was my fault for lying about gaming. She said I was being cruel and unfair. I read the text feeling my anger build. I typed back that we'd talk tomorrow and left it at that. I turned my phone face down on the coffee table. The silence pressed in around me. I laid down on the couch and pulled the blanket over myself. My body felt exhausted, but my brain wouldn't shut off. I stared at the ceiling in the dark. Jake's apartment had those popcorn ceilings with little bumps and shadows. I traced patterns in the texture, trying to make my mind focus on something besides everything that happened. My phone kept lighting up on the coffee table, even though it was face down. I could see the glow through the gap. Each time it lit up, I knew it was another text from Alyssa. I forced myself not to look. The ceiling had a water stain in one corner shaped kind of like a cloud. I studied it and tried to breathe slowly. My chest still felt tight. My hands still felt shaky when I held them up. The victory should have felt amazing. We came back from being destroyed. We won. But instead, I felt hollow and sick. I rolled onto my side, facing the back of the couch. The fabric smelled like laundry detergent. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but my brain kept racing. I thought about how Alyssa wore that jersey, how she cheered against me, how she looked at that other guy, how she blew him kisses, things she never did for me. I thought about the 2 years of lying about gaming, telling her I was working night shifts at a warehouse. The guilt mixed with anger mixed with hurt until I couldn't separate them anymore. Hours passed. I knew it was hours because I kept checking my phone for the time without reading the messages. Midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. Sleep never came. Around 3 a.m., I opened social media without thinking. That was a mistake. Clips from the tournament were everywhere. Someone had posted the full video of the ceremony, including Alyssa's face on the big screen. It already had thousands of views. The comments were brutal. People calling her names. People saying I deserved better. People making jokes. Some people saying I was wrong for lying about gaming. Others defending me. The whole thing had blown up into a debate about relationships and honesty. I saw my face in thumbnails and screenshots. Saw Alyssa's face. Saw the moment of confrontation captured from multiple angles. I closed the app, but the images stayed burned in my mind. I put my phone on the floor so I couldn't reach it easily. I pulled the blanket over my head, trying to block everything out. My eyes burned from being open so long. My body ached from tension. But sleep still wouldn't come. I just laid there in the dark on Jake's couch, replaying every moment and wondering how I missed all the signs that my wife was cheating on me. I woke up around 6 in the morning with my neck stiff from Jake's couch. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I sat up and rubbed my eyes, feeling the exhaustion settle into my bones. My phone was still on the floor where I'd left it. I picked it up and saw 83 messages from Alyssa now. I didn't open them. I stood up and folded the blanket Jake had given me, setting it on the arm of the couch. My body felt heavy as I moved around the apartment. Jake was still asleep in his room with the door closed. I found my shoes by the door and slipped them on without tying the laces. I grabbed my keys and wallet from the coffee table. The morning air outside was cold and damp. I walked to my car, parked down the street, and got in. The engine started with a rattle that echoed in the empty neighborhood. I drove toward the apartment I shared with Alyssa, knowing she wouldn't be there. She'd texted last night saying she was staying at her sister's place. The drive took 15 minutes through streets that were mostly empty. I parked in my usual spot and sat in the car for a moment, staring at the building. My hands gripped the steering wheel tight enough that my knuckles turned white. I forced myself to get out and walk up the stairs to the second floor. The hallway smelled like old carpet and someone's breakfast cooking. I unlocked the door and pushed it open. The silence inside felt thick and wrong. I stepped in and closed the door behind me. The living room looked exactly how I'd left it 2 days ago. Alyssa's shoes were scattered by the couch. Her coffee mug sat on the side table with a brown ring stained at the bottom. I walked toward the kitchen, and that's when I saw it. On the counter next to the sink was a canvas tote bag. The enemy team's jersey was stuffed inside, crumpled and wrinkled. Her wallet sat next to it along with her keys on the ring shaped like a cat. I walked closer and pulled the jersey out of the bag. The fabric felt rough in my hands. I held it up and stared at the logo printed across the chest. The number on the back was my rival's number. The confirmation hit me like a punch to the gut. She really wore this. She really cheered against me while wearing another man's jersey. My hands started shaking as I dropped the jersey back into the bag. I leaned against the counter and closed my eyes. The apartment felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were pressing in. I stood there for several minutes, just breathing. Then I pulled out my phone and opened my messages. I typed out a text to Alyssa without reading any of hers. I said we needed to meet at the coffee shop near campus at 2 o'clock today. I said it had to be somewhere public. I hit send and shoved the phone back in my pocket. I didn't want to be in the apartment anymore. I grabbed a few things from the bedroom, stuffing clothes into a backpack I found in the closet. I took my phone charger and my toothbrush from the bathroom. Then I left and locked the door behind me. I got back to Jake's apartment around 8 in the morning. He was awake now, sitting at the kitchen table eating cereal. He looked up when I walked in and nodded, but didn't ask questions. I dropped the backpack by the couch and sat down. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw Alyssa had responded. She said 2 o'clock was fine, but she wanted to know why I was being so dramatic. She said we could talk at home like normal people. I didn't respond. I set my phone on the coffee table face down. Jake finished his cereal and brought the bowl to the sink. He asked if I wanted breakfast, but I shook my head. I wasn't hungry. I spent the next few hours pacing around Jake's apartment. I walked from the living room to the kitchen and back again. I rehearsed what I was going to say to Alyssa. I practiced the words out loud when Jake went to take a shower. I tried different versions, different tones. Nothing felt right. At noon, I took a shower and changed into clean clothes. Jake offered to drive me to the coffee shop, but I said I needed to walk. The fresh air might help clear my head. I left his apartment at 1:30 and walked the 20 minutes to campus. The coffee shop was on the corner of a busy street. It had big windows and small tables packed close together. I went inside and ordered a black coffee I didn't really want. I sat at a table near the back where I could see the door. My leg bounced under the table as I waited. Alyssa showed up at 2:15. She walked in wearing sunglasses even though it was cloudy outside. She spotted me and walked over without ordering anything. She sat down across from me and took off the sunglasses. Her eyes were red like she'd been crying. She folded her hands on the table and stared at me. I stared back. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. The coffee shop was busy with students studying and people on laptops. The noise around us felt distant. Finally, Alyssa spoke first. She said this was all a huge mistake and she didn't mean for any of it to happen. She said she got confused and made a bad choice. Her voice was quiet and shaky. I listened without interrupting. She said I was the one who lied first by hiding my gaming career for 2 years. She said I made her feel like she couldn't trust me. She said if I'd just been honest from the start, none of this would have happened. I felt my jaw tighten. I took a breath and told her I was wrong to lie about gaming. I said I did it because I was scared she'd leave me if she knew the truth. I said that doesn't excuse what I did, but it explains it. Then I said her cheating and wearing another man's jersey to humiliate me publicly was not the same thing. She looked away and shook her head. She said I was making it sound worse than it was. She said it was only one time and she didn't think I'd ever find out. She said she never meant to hurt me. I asked her about the guy in the audience who said she dated him at a previous tournament. Her face went pale. She said that was different and complicated. She said he was lying to get attention. I didn't believe her. We went in circles for almost an hour. She kept minimizing what she did and turning it back on me. I kept trying to explain the difference between my lie and her betrayal. Nothing was getting through. Other customers glanced over at us occasionally. We were keeping our voices down, but the tension was obvious. Finally, I said we needed to separate for a while. She asked what that meant. I said it meant I needed space to figure out what I wanted. I said I couldn't just pretend this didn't happen. She started crying then. She said I was abandoning her and being cruel. She said I was throwing away our marriage over one mistake. I felt something cold settle in my chest. I told her I'd come by the apartment tomorrow to get more of my things. I said she could stay there and I'd figure out somewhere else to live. She asked where I was going to go. I said that wasn't her concern right now. I stood up and left my untouched coffee on the table. She called after me, but I didn't turn around. I walked back to the apartment alone. The sky had gotten darker and it looked like rain. I let myself in and went straight to the bedroom. I pulled a duffel bag from the closet and started filling it with clothes. I grabbed my laptop and charger from the desk. I took my gaming headset and mouse. I moved through the apartment quickly, not letting myself stop to think. In the kitchen, I grabbed my favorite mug and a few other things. Alyssa's keys were still on the counter next to that canvas bag. I left them there. I took my own key off my keyring and set it on the counter. The metal made a small clinking sound when it hit the surface. I looked around the apartment one last time. The hollow feeling in my chest wasn't sadness exactly. It was just the weight of something ending. I slung the duffel bag over my shoulder and walked out. I locked the door behind me with the spare key I still had, then slid that one under the door. I didn't want any reason to come back here. My phone started buzzing constantly as soon as I got back to Jake's place. The team group chat was blowing up. I opened it and saw dozens of messages. Jake was asking if I was okay. Two other teammates were discussing whether we needed to make a statement. Someone posted a link to a gaming news site that had already written an article about the tournament incident. The headline called it a dramatic upset with personal stakes. I scrolled through the messages feeling overwhelmed. I typed out a response saying I wanted to keep personal details private. I asked them not to talk to press or post about it on social media. I said I appreciated their support, but I needed to handle this my own way. The responses came back quickly. Everyone agreed to keep quiet. Jake sent a private message asking if I needed anything. I told him I was fine and just needed time. I set my phone down and lay back on the couch. The ceiling looked the same as it had last night. I closed my eyes. My phone buzzed again an hour later. I picked it up and saw a DM request on social media from someone named Ray Tillman. I opened it. The message was professional and polite. He said he was a journalist covering the gaming scene and wanted to offer me a chance to tell my side of what happened at the tournament. He said he understood this was a difficult time, but thought it might help to have my perspective out there. He left his email and phone number. I read the message twice. Part of me wanted to ignore it completely. Another part of me wondered if he was right. Maybe getting ahead of the story would help, but I didn't have the energy to deal with it right now. I typed back a short response saying I appreciated him reaching out, but I needed time to process before making any statements. I said I'd reach out if I changed my mind. His reply came fast. He said he understood and would respect my privacy. He said he'd be writing something regardless since it was already public, but he wanted to make sure I knew the door was open. I thanked him and closed the app. That evening, my phone rang. I saw Beck's name on the screen. Beck was my manager, the guy who handled all the business side of my gaming career. I answered, and he got straight to the point. He said sponsors were asking questions. He said they wanted to know how to handle inquiries from press and fans. He said some of them were worried about the negative attention. I felt my stomach drop. I hadn't even thought about sponsors. Beck's voice was calm and practical. He said we needed to agree on a holding statement, something brief that would satisfy companies without getting into personal details. He suggested saying I was focused on the team and wouldn't be discussing personal matters at this time. I agreed. It sounded professional and simple. We talked for a few more minutes about logistics. Beck said he'd send the statement to all relevant parties and handle any follow-up questions. He asked if I was doing okay. I said I was managing. He told me to call if I needed anything. After we hung up, I felt exhausted. The business side of my personal crisis was overwhelming. I hadn't realized how many people had a stake in my life beyond just me and Alyssa. Around 9 that night, I got a text from an unknown number. I opened it and saw it was from Camelia. She was one of our team coaches and someone I'd become friends with over the past year. The message said she heard what happened and wanted to check in. She said if I needed a place to stay that wasn't Jake's couch, she had a spare room I could use. No pressure and no timeline. I stared at the message for a long time. The offer felt generous and kind. It also felt embarrassing that I needed help like this. But Jake's couch wasn't a long-term solution, and I knew it. I texted back saying I really appreciated the offer and would take her up on it if she was sure. She responded immediately saying she was completely sure, and I could move in whenever I wanted. She said she'd text me her address. The relief I felt was mixed with shame. I was a grown adult who couldn't even keep my own living situation together. But I pushed the shame down and focused on the practical side. Camelia's place would give me stability while I figured everything else out. My phone buzzed again before I could put it down. This time it was a text from a number I didn't recognize. I opened it and saw a long message from someone who identified themselves as Alyssa's sister. The text was hostile and angry. She said I had no right to abandon my wife when she needed me most. She said I aired our dirty laundry in public and humiliated Alyssa in front of thousands of people. She said I was a coward who couldn't handle one mistake. She said Alyssa was devastated and it was all my fault. I read the message twice, feeling my anger build. Alyssa had already spun the narrative to her family. She'd painted herself as the victim and me as the villain. I thought about responding but decided against it. Anything I said would just make things worse. Instead, I blocked the number and deleted the message. The alienation stung more than I expected. I'd always gotten along with Alyssa's family. Her sister used to invite us over for holidays. Now she was sending me hate texts based on whatever version of events Alyssa had told her. One more notification popped up before I finally silenced my phone. It was a DM from my rival on the enemy team. I opened it with my jaw clenched. The message was surprisingly genuine. He said he wanted to apologize and make it clear he had no idea Alyssa was married. He said she told him she was single and really into gaming. He said he felt terrible about the whole situation and understood if I hated him. He said he just wanted me to know he'd been deceived too. I read the message several times. His tone seemed honest. I wanted to be angry at him, but the anger felt misplaced. He was a victim of Alyssa's lies, just like I was. But I also couldn't bring myself to respond right away. The whole thing was too complicated and raw. I closed the app without replying and finally turned my phone completely off. I lay back on Jake's couch and pulled the blanket over myself. My mind was still racing, but at least the constant notifications had stopped. The next morning, I woke up early and searched for walk-in clinics nearby. I found one that opened at 8 and offered STD testing without appointments. The drive over felt strange, like I was moving through someone else's life. I parked in the small lot and walked through the front doors into a waiting room with beige walls and outdated magazines. The receptionist handed me a clipboard with forms asking about sexual history and symptoms. I filled everything out mechanically, checking boxes and writing dates. When I handed the forms back, she told me to wait and someone would call me soon. I sat in a plastic chair next to an older guy reading a newspaper and a young woman scrolling her phone. Nobody made eye contact. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead and I felt exposed sitting there, like everyone knew why I was getting tested. A nurse called my name after 20 minutes and led me to a small exam room. She explained the testing process in a calm, professional voice that made me feel slightly less ashamed. The actual test was quick and clinical. She told me results would take 3 to 5 business days and they'd call with the outcome. I thanked her and left, walking back to my car with this weird, empty feeling. The responsible thing was done, but now I had to wait and wonder. Our first scrim since the tournament started at 2 that afternoon. I logged in early and ran through warm-up drills, trying to get my head right. My teammates joined the voice channel one by one, keeping the energy light. We loaded into the practice match against a mid-tier team we should have handled easily. But from the first round, I was off. I missed a call-out about enemy positioning that got Jake killed. 2 rounds later, I positioned myself too aggressively and got picked off early, leaving my team in a bad situation. My aim felt shaky, and my decision-making was slow, like I was playing through fog. Jake covered for me initially, making calls I should have made. But as we fell further behind, I heard the frustration creeping into everyone's voices. We lost the first map badly. During the break between maps, nobody said anything directly to me, but the silence felt heavy. I apologized for my poor play and promised to focus better. The second map went slightly better, but we still lost. After the scrim ended, I sat staring at my screen feeling that old self-doubt crawl back in. Maybe I couldn't handle pressure. Maybe the tournament win was just luck. Maybe I was going to let my team down when it actually mattered. Camellia messaged me privately asking to talk after everyone else logged off. I stayed in the voice channel while my teammates dropped out one by one. When it was just us, she got straight to the point. She said my performance today was concerning, and we needed to address what was happening. I admitted I was struggling to focus with everything going on. She listened without interrupting, then told me I needed to set clear boundaries around my personal situation. She said the team needed me functional, and that meant taking active steps to manage the chaos. We talked about developing a proper PR plan so I wasn't constantly reacting to online drama. She suggested limiting social media, establishing no contact periods with Alyssa, and being more structured about separating team time from personal problems. Her tone was direct but not mean. She acknowledged this was genuinely hard, but made it clear I couldn't keep playing like I did today. The combination of accountability and support helped me feel less like I was drowning. She said she believed in me, but I had to do the work to get my head straight. I agreed to everything she suggested and thanked her for being honest. After we hung up, I felt slightly more grounded, like I had a plan instead of just chaos. That night, I sat at Camelia's kitchen table with my laptop and started drafting a personal statement. I wanted to own my mistake of lying to Alyssa about gaming without trashing her publicly. The first version was too emotional, full of hurt and anger bleeding through every sentence. I deleted it and started over, focusing on accountability. I wrote about hiding my passion because I feared rejection, acknowledging that lying was wrong regardless of my reasons. I mentioned that relationships require honesty even when the truth is scary. I kept Alyssa's actions vague, not detailing the cheating or public humiliation. The statement was 3 paragraphs, trying to strike a balance between taking responsibility and not completely throwing myself under the bus. I sent it to Beck around midnight asking him to edit it. He responded within an hour with a cleaner, more professional version. He'd removed the parts where my pain was too obvious and tightened the language. Reading his edits, I realized how much my hurt had been showing through. The final version felt measured and mature, even if it didn't capture everything I was feeling. Beck said it was good to post whenever I was ready. I published the statement the next morning on my social media accounts. Within minutes, responses started flooding in. Some people were supportive, saying everyone makes mistakes and appreciating my honesty. Others criticized me for lying in the first place, saying I had no right to complain about consequences. A few people defended Alyssa, suggesting I must have done something to drive her away. I read the first dozen comments, then forced myself to close the apps. I knew scrolling through responses would only make me feel worse, picking apart every criticism and questioning every word I'd written. The vulnerability hangover hit hard as I second-guessed the entire statement. Maybe I'd said too much. Maybe I hadn't said enough. Maybe I should have just stayed silent. Beck texted saying the statement was getting good traction, and most responses were reasonable. I thanked him but didn't open social media again. The exposure of putting my personal business out there felt raw and uncomfortable. Later that afternoon, Alyssa posted a vague story on her social media. I saw it because someone screenshot it and sent it to Jake, who showed me. Her post implied we both lied and hurt each other equally, painting the situation as mutual mistakes rather than her cheating. She didn't mention specifics, but the tone suggested I was just as guilty as she was. Her friends immediately filled the comments with supportive messages that subtly bashed me. They called her strong and brave, said she deserved better, implied I was controlling or neglectful. I felt irritation rise as I read through the comments. The narrative she was building completely ignored what actually happened, but I resisted the urge to retaliate or correct the record publicly. Getting into a social media war would only make everything worse. I handed Jake's phone back and told him I wasn't engaging with it. He nodded approval, saying that was the smart move. Still, it bothered me that she was rewriting history, and people were believing her version. The next day, our landlord sent an email asking about the lease. She wanted to know if we were both staying or if someone was moving out, since the lease was up for renewal in 2 months. The email was polite but practical, asking us to let her know our plans so she could prepare accordingly. Reading it made the administrative reality of separation hit me. We had to figure out deposits, utilities, who was taking what furniture, all the boring logistics of untangling a shared life. I forwarded the email to Alyssa with a brief message saying I'd already moved out and asking her to handle the lease situation. I suggested she could keep the apartment if she wanted, or we could both leave and let the landlord find new tenants. I kept the tone neutral and businesslike, not wanting to start another fight. She didn't respond immediately, which was probably for the best. 2 days later, I returned to the apartment with Jake to grab more of my belongings. I'd texted Alyssa beforehand saying I was coming and asking her not to be there. She didn't reply, but her car wasn't in the parking lot when we arrived. I unlocked the door and walked into what used to be my home. The apartment looked different somehow, like Alyssa had been stress living in chaos. Her stuff was scattered everywhere, dishes piled in the sink, clothes draped over furniture, empty takeout containers on the coffee table. Jake stayed near the door while I moved through the rooms, packing things into boxes. I grabbed my gaming equipment first, carefully wrapping monitors and organizing cables. Then I packed clothes, books, random personal items that were mine. The quiet grief of boxing up pieces of my life settled over me as I worked. Each item I packed felt like acknowledging the relationship was really over. Jake helped me carry boxes to his car without saying much. We made 3 trips total. When the car was loaded, I took one last look around the apartment, then locked the door and left the key on the kitchen counter. That evening, I scheduled an intake appointment with Justina Ellis, a therapist the team program covered for player mental health. The first available slot was 3 days out. When the appointment arrived, I drove to her office in a professional building downtown. The waiting room had comfortable chairs and calm artwork on the walls. Justina came out to greet me right on time. She was probably in her 40s with an easy manner that put me slightly at ease. We sat in her office and she asked me to explain what brought me in. I told her the whole story, starting with lying about gaming and ending with the tournament disaster. She listened carefully, taking occasional notes but mostly just paying attention. When I finished, I admitted I didn't know how to process any of this. She nodded and said that was completely normal given what I'd been through. Instead of diving into deep analysis, she focused on immediate coping strategies. We talked about breathing exercises, ways to manage intrusive thoughts, and how to separate work performance from personal chaos. She gave me practical tools I could use right away. The session felt helpful without being overwhelming. The next morning, team ownership called a meeting. It was me, the team manager, and 2 people from the organization's leadership. They were professional but direct about setting clear performance expectations. They mentioned my recent poor play and said they understood I was dealing with personal issues, but the team needed consistent performance. One of them brought up potential benching if my play didn't stabilize, framing it as a necessary option to protect the team's competitive standing. The message was delivered without hostility, but the stakes were obvious. My career depended on pulling myself together. I committed to doing better, outlining the steps I was taking with therapy and practice routines. They seemed satisfied with my response, but made it clear they'd be watching my performance closely. After the meeting ended, I sat in my car for a few minutes processing the pressure. Then I drove to the practice facility, determined to prove I could handle this. The next scrim session started 2 days later, and I sat in my gaming chair focusing on the breathing technique Justina had shown me. 4 counts in, hold for 4, 4 counts out. My hands felt steadier on the mouse as I loaded into the practice match. The first round started and I forced myself to make clear call-outs instead of staying silent. I spotted an enemy flanking left and called it out immediately, my voice coming through the headset without the usual hesitation. My positioning felt more deliberate as I held the angle Jake needed me to cover. We won the first round and I felt a small spark of something that wasn't shame or panic. The second round went smoother as I traded kills efficiently and rotated when my team needed support. By the third round, Jake gave me a quick nod between plays, and that tiny acknowledgement felt huge. We finished the scrim with a decent performance, and while I wasn't back to my peak level, I had actually functioned like a real teammate instead of dead weight. Walking out of the practice facility that evening, the small win of basic competence settled into my chest and reminded me I hadn't completely lost everything. 3 days later, I opened my laptop to check emails and saw Alyssa's name in my inbox. The subject line read, "Financial issue," and my stomach tightened before I even clicked it. She wrote that she needed money for a spa deposit she claimed she'd made months ago, saying the place was demanding payment or they'd cancel her membership. The amount was $600. I stared at the dates she mentioned and pulled up my calendar to cross-reference when she said she'd booked it. The timeline felt wrong because that would have been right around when we went to that tournament where the guy in the audience said she'd dated him. Suspicion crawled up my spine as I wondered if this was another lie or some kind of manipulation to get money from me. I closed the laptop without responding, needing time to think through how to handle our tangled finances. The email sat unanswered in my inbox while I paced around Camelia's spare room, trying to decide if I was being paranoid or if my gut was right about something being off. The next morning, I replied to Alyssa asking for receipts or some kind of confirmation from the spa, showing she'd actually made the deposit months ago. I kept the email short and factual, just requesting documentation before sending money. Her response came back within an hour, and the tone was completely different from her original message. She accused me of abandoning her financially and being controlling about money that was technically ours. The anger in her words felt way too big for a simple request for proof, and that reaction made me more certain something didn't add up about her story. I read through her email twice, noting how she'd pivoted from asking nicely to attacking me for not immediately sending cash. The pattern reminded me of other times she'd gotten defensive when caught in small lies, and I saved both emails to a folder on my desktop. I didn't respond to her second message, letting the silence sit between us while I focused on separating our finances properly instead of getting pulled into another fight. 2 days after that email exchange, Ray's article went live on a gaming news site I checked regularly. The headline read, "When Passion and Partnership Collide, a Case Study in Gaming Careers," and I clicked through with my jaw tight. He'd written a balanced piece about how gaming careers create relationship strain, using our situation as an example without naming either of us directly. The article acknowledged that hiding a career was a breach of trust, but also explored how dismissive attitudes toward gaming push people into secrecy. Ray included quotes from relationship experts and other pro gamers about navigating partner expectations. Reading it made me feel exposed and uncomfortable seeing our private mess turned into a public example, but I had to admit he didn't sensationalize it or paint either of us as a villain. The comment section filled with people debating who was more wrong and sharing their own stories about hiding hobbies from judgmental partners. I closed the tab feeling uneasy about being a case study, but appreciating that Ray had kept his word about fairness. That same evening, a notification popped up on my phone from a username I didn't recognize. The message started with, "Hey, I'm the guy from the tournament who said your wife dated me," and my finger hovered over the delete button. But curiosity won, and I opened the full message to see he'd attached screenshots of conversations between him and Alyssa from 3 months ago. I scrolled through the images, seeing her tell him she was single and worked in marketing, asking about his gaming schedule and which tournaments he'd be attending. The next screenshots showed similar conversations with 2 other players from different teams, all within a 6-month period. A pattern emerged of her targeting players at tournaments and lying about her relationship status to get close to them. One conversation had her asking a player what hotel he was staying at during an event, the flirtation obvious even through text. The clarity hit me hard because seeing the evidence laid out showed this wasn't about my failures or her feeling neglected. This was calculated behavior that had nothing to do with our problems and everything to do with her own choices. I sat on Camelia's couch staring at the screenshots until my eyes burned, processing the painful truth that I'd been blaming myself for something that was never really about me. I spent the next hour staring at those screenshots and considering whether to post them publicly or send them to people who'd been defending Alyssa online. My finger hovered over the share button multiple times as anger pushed me toward exposing her pattern of lies to everyone who thought I was the only bad guy in this situation. But each time I got close to posting, something stopped me and made me think about what kind of person I wanted to be when this was all over. Keeping the screenshots for my own understanding felt like enough because I didn't need to destroy her reputation publicly to know the truth about what happened. I didn't want to become someone who weaponized private information even if she deserved the exposure. The restraint felt like taking back some control over how I handled this whole mess, instead of just reacting emotionally to everything she did. I saved the screenshots to a private folder, thanked the guy for sending them, and closed the app. The choice to keep them private wasn't about protecting Alyssa, but about protecting the person I wanted to be. 3 days later, I messaged Justina asking if she'd be willing to facilitate a joint mediation session between me and Alyssa. I explained we needed a neutral space to talk through separation logistics without it turning into a screaming match. Justina responded within a few hours saying she could do one session focused on practical communication rather than couples therapy. I forwarded her response to Alyssa expecting a hostile reply or flat refusal. Instead, Alyssa agreed to one meeting, which surprised me enough that I read her email 3 times to make sure I understood correctly. The coordination took several days of back and forth about scheduling, with Justina finding a time that worked for all 3 of us the following week. I marked the appointment in my calendar and spent the days leading up to it trying to prepare mentally for sitting in a room with Alyssa. I went in with low expectations, but some small guarded hope that maybe we could at least communicate clearly enough to handle the separation without constant fighting. The mediation session happened in Justina's office on a Tuesday afternoon, and the tension in the room made the air feel thick. Justina started by setting ground rules about taking turns speaking and focusing on practical issues rather than attacking each other. Alyssa went first and admitted she'd felt belittled by my gaming career, saying she'd grown up watching her dad waste their family's money on gambling and saw gaming as the same kind of pointless risk. She talked about resenting being left alone so many nights while I was supposedly at work, feeling like she came second to a hobby she didn't understand. Her voice cracked when she said she'd wanted me to choose her over gaming, and when I didn't, she'd looked for attention elsewhere. I sat listening without interrupting, even though parts of her explanation felt like excuses. When it was my turn, I acknowledged that hiding my career to avoid rejection had been cowardly and unfair to her. I explained I'd been scared she'd leave if she knew the truth, but that fear didn't justify lying for 2 years about where I was and what I was doing. I admitted I'd made her feel less important by prioritizing practice and tournaments without being honest about what they meant to me. Neither of us excused the other's behavior, but the honesty cut through some of the defensive posturing we'd been stuck in. Justina helped us identify that we'd both been protecting ourselves in ways that hurt the other person, and while that didn't fix anything, it at least gave us a clearer picture of how we'd gotten here. The next day, I walked into a bank branch I'd researched online and opened my own checking account separate from our joint finances. The banker walked me through paperwork and asked about direct deposits, automatic payments, and account preferences. I spent an hour updating my team payment information to route to the new account and made a list of all the shared bills that would need to be split or transferred. Each step toward financial independence felt tedious but necessary as I untangled automatic payments for streaming services, utilities, and insurance. I called the electric company to remove my name from the apartment account and updated my address with the bank to Camelia's place. The process of separating our day-to-day money made everything feel more real and final in a way that hurt differently than the emotional stuff. By the time I finished all the administrative tasks, my head ached from phone calls and forms. But I had my own account with my own money that Alyssa couldn't access or control. The independence felt like both loss and relief, acknowledging our lives were splitting apart while giving me control over my own financial future. Later that evening, I was hanging up my jacket and felt something hard in the pocket. I reached in and pulled out my wedding ring, the metal cold against my palm. I'd taken it off weeks ago and shoved it in my pocket without thinking, then forgotten about it completely. Standing there holding the ring, I felt the weight of everything that symbol used to mean, and everything it didn't mean anymore. I found the original box in my drawer and placed the ring inside carefully, unable to wear it but not ready to throw it away or sell it. The ring sat in its box on my desk while I pulled out my phone and called Camelia without planning what I'd say. She answered on the second ring, and I just said I needed someone to be there. We sat on the phone together, breathing while I processed the grief of putting away my wedding ring and accepting my marriage was really over. Camelia didn't try to fill the silence with advice or comfort. She just stayed present on the other end of the line. Her breathing matched mine, and the simple act of not being alone while I fell apart helped more than any words could have. After 20 minutes of just existing together through the phone, I thanked her and we hung up. The ring stayed in its box on my desk, a reminder of what I'd lost and what I was slowly learning to live without. The team called a meeting 3 days later about organizing a charity stream for mental health awareness. Everyone sat around the practice facility break room while Camelia explained the format and goals. The stream would run for 6 hours with rotating players and open discussion about gaming culture and personal wellness. I listened to the details about viewer donations and partner organizations without saying much. When Camelia asked if anyone wanted to share their story briefly during the broadcast, the room went quiet. I raised my hand before I could overthink it. Jake looked at me with raised eyebrows but nodded approval. We spent the next hour planning segments and topics, keeping everything structured so nobody felt pressured to overshare. I agreed to a 10-minute segment about setting boundaries in relationships and why honesty matters even when it's scary. The team seemed relieved someone was willing to go first and open up the conversation. Camelia pulled me aside afterward to make sure I felt ready and wasn't forcing myself. I told her it felt right to use what happened for something useful instead of just hiding from it. The rival team posted an announcement 2 days before our charity stream. They were conducting an internal review of player conduct policies and relationship disclosure requirements. The statement didn't name anyone specifically or throw my rival under the bus. It acknowledged that unclear boundaries had created problems and they were taking steps to prevent future issues. I read it twice on my phone while sitting in Camelia's kitchen. The response felt measured and fair instead of reactionary. Part of me appreciated they weren't destroying someone who'd also been lied to and manipulated. Another part still felt angry that Alyssa had put multiple people in this position. I screenshot the announcement and sent it to Jake with no comment. He replied with a thumbs up. The whole situation remained complicated and messy, but at least the rival organization was trying to do better instead of just blaming individuals. Jake and I met at a coffee shop near the practice facility to work through our communication patterns. He brought a notebook with plays and positioning diagrams from our recent scrims. We spent an hour reviewing moments where my callouts had been unclear or delayed. Jake didn't sugarcoat anything, but he also didn't make it personal. He showed me 3 specific rounds where better communication would have changed outcomes. I acknowledged each one, and we talked through what I should have said differently. Then we switched to his areas for improvement. Looking at times his positioning left me exposed. The balance of accountability felt good instead of one-sided. We ordered a second round of coffee and mapped out our roles for the upcoming qualifier. Jake reminded me that we functioned best when I handled mid-control, and he focused on entry fragging. The team-first approach helped me feel connected to something bigger than my personal mess. By the time we left, I felt more confident about our synergy and less worried about letting everyone down. I came home from practice to find a cardboard box sitting outside Camelia's door. My name was written on top in Alyssa's handwriting. I carried it inside and set it on the kitchen counter before opening it. Inside were random items from our apartment, things I'd forgotten or hadn't prioritized during my quick packing trips. A hoodie I'd been looking for, some gaming peripherals, a photo album from our first year together. Tucked on top was a folded piece of notebook paper. I unfolded it and read her handwriting saying she didn't mean to hurt me and hoped I was doing okay. The apology felt hollow and self-serving, more about making herself feel better than genuine remorse. Nothing in the note acknowledged the full scope of what she'd done or showed real understanding of the damage. I read it twice looking for something authentic, but only found vague regret. The conflicted softening her words tried to create didn't take hold. I folded the note back up and stuck it in the box without responding. Camelia asked if I was all right when she got home, and I just shrugged. The box sat in my room for 2 days before I finally unpacked it and threw the note away. I bought a wall calendar and a pack of colored markers to build a proper training schedule. Sleep time got marked in blue, meals in green, scrim blocks in red, solo practice in orange. I set alarms on my phone for each transition and stuck to them even when I didn't feel like it. Meal prep happened every Sunday with chicken, rice, and vegetables portioned into containers. My sleep schedule shifted to consistent 8-hour blocks instead of the chaotic pattern I'd been running. The discipline felt good after weeks of emotional chaos. Having control over something tangible made me feel less powerless about everything else. My gameplay started showing real improvement as the routine took hold. Shots landed more consistently, positioning felt more natural, callouts came faster. Jake noticed during scrims and mentioned my timing was getting sharp again. The structure gave me something to focus on besides the constant replay of tournament drama. Each day following the schedule felt like a small win building towards something bigger. The clinic called with my test results on a Tuesday morning. Everything came back negative. I thanked the nurse and hung up feeling a wave of relief without any celebration. The clean bill of health removed one source of anxiety from the pile of stress I'd been carrying. I filed the paperwork in a folder with other medical documents and closed the drawer. The whole experience of needing the test in the first place still made me feel gross. I tried not to think about why it had been necessary or what it said about my marriage. Instead, I focused on the relief of crossing one more thing off my worry list. Jake texted asking how it went, and I replied with a simple thumbs up. He sent back a fist bump emoji. The small exchange of support helped more than a long conversation would have. I spent the rest of the day training and didn't let myself dwell on any of it. Beck called during my lunch break to tell me he'd secured a sponsor queue and a session for the following week. The energy drink company wanted me to answer fan questions on their social media. He'd already set clear boundaries with them about what topics were off limits. No questions about Alyssa, no questions about personal drama, nothing that wasn't directly related to gaming or team performance. I agreed to participate knowing professional obligations didn't pause for personal problems. Beck sent over a prep document with likely questions and suggested talking points. We spent 20 minutes on the phone rehearsing responses until I felt more confident. The structure and preparation helped me feel less anxious about facing public interaction. Beck reminded me I could always redirect or decline to answer if something felt wrong. His support made the whole thing feel manageable instead of overwhelming. I marked the Q&A date on my calendar and spent the next few days reviewing the prep materials. Qualifier day arrived and I woke up 2 hours before my alarm. I lay in bed running through my pre-match routine mentally before getting up. Shower, light breakfast, gear check, warm-up drills. I committed to keeping my eyes on the screen and comms, refusing to scan the crowd or get distracted by anything outside the game. My headset went on and the world narrowed to just the match. The intentional focus felt like putting on armor against everything else. I ran through aim training maps until my hands felt loose and responsive. Jake arrived at the venue same time as me, and we did our team warm-up together. The familiar rhythm of preparation steadied my nerves. I blocked out thoughts about Alyssa, about drama, about anything except the game in front of me. When we took our seats in the competition area, I adjusted my monitor and checked my settings twice. Everything felt right. My breathing stayed even and controlled. The countdown started and I locked in. The early maps were shaky as nerves affected my timing on crucial shots. I missed an easy pick that should have opened up the round. My positioning felt slightly off, and I second-guessed calls I normally made automatically. The pressure of needing to perform well after everything that happened weighed heavier than I expected. But halfway through Map 2, I forced myself to redirect team comms and steady my focus. I called out enemy positions clearly and moved with more confidence. My teammates responded to the callouts, and we clawed back from a rough start. Jake Entry fragged perfectly on 3 consecutive rounds, and I traded kills when he went down. The synergy we'd practiced started clicking into place. Our coordination improved as I stopped overthinking and just played. By Map 3, we'd found our rhythm, and the match felt competitive again. The resilience under strain felt like proof I could handle adversity and come back stronger. We lost the qualifier 2-3 in a series that could have gone either way. The final round came down to a 1 versus 2 situation that we couldn't quite close out. I pulled off my headset and sat back in my chair, feeling the disappointment settle in my chest. The loss was real and it hurt. But I'd given everything I had and played with focus despite the pressure. I stood up and walked over to shake my rival's hand after the match. He looked surprised but accepted it with genuine respect. No hard feelings about the competition itself, just 2 players who'd battled hard. My team gathered for a quick debrief and nobody blamed me or made excuses. We acknowledged what went wrong and what we'd do better next time. I handled the disappointment with composure, knowing this was just one tournament in a longer journey. The ability to lose without falling apart felt like its own kind of victory. That night I sat in front of my webcam at Camelia's place and recorded a message for my fans. I kept it short, maybe 2 minutes, talking straight to the camera about taking responsibility for my performance in the qualifier. I thanked everyone for their support and said I was working on improving my game and my focus. No excuses about personal stuff, just honest acknowledgement that I could do better. Posting it felt scary but necessary, like admitting my mistakes publicly, instead of hiding behind drama. The comments came in fast, mostly positive, people saying they respected the honesty. I closed the laptop before I could read too many and second-guess myself. The next morning, Ray Tillman sent another message asking if I'd do a follow-up interview. I stared at the request for a while before typing back that I'd agree, but Alyssa and relationship details were completely off limits. He responded within minutes saying he respected that and wanted to focus on gaming culture and personal growth anyway. We scheduled a call for that afternoon, and I spent an hour beforehand going over what I wanted to say. The actual interview went better than expected. Ray asked thoughtful questions about balancing career pressure with mental health, about the gaming community's reaction to personal drama, about what I'd learned. I kept my answers grounded and forward-looking, refusing to trash anyone or play victim. The control over my own narrative felt powerful, like I was finally steering my story instead of just reacting to it. When we finished, Ray thanked me and said the piece would run in a few days. I hung up feeling lighter, like I'd handled something professionally instead of letting it handle me. 2 days later, Beck called with news about a contract extension. The team wanted to keep me, but with a performance clause tied to results over the next 3 months. I met with ownership that afternoon, and they laid it out clearly, showing me the numbers I needed to hit and the benchmarks they expected. The conditional nature stung a little, but I understood it. They were taking a risk keeping me after everything that happened. I signed the paperwork right there, shaking hands with the team manager who told me they believed I could bounce back. Walking out of that office, I felt motivated instead of pressured, like I had something concrete to work toward. That same week, I contacted the lawyer Beck recommended and set up a meeting about legal separation. The office was small and plain, just a desk and some filing cabinets. The lawyer walked me through the process, explaining it would be straightforward since Alyssa and I had no kids and no major shared assets. I filled out forms listing our apartment lease and basic belongings, keeping my answers factual and unemotional. He drafted a polite notice to send Alyssa without any accusations, just clean legal language about separating our lives. Signing those papers felt heavier than the contract extension, more final somehow. But it also felt necessary, like closing a door that needed to stay closed. The lawyer said he'd handle sending everything to Alyssa, and I left his office with copies of the paperwork in my bag. I spent the next few days apartment hunting online, scrolling through listings during breaks from practice. Most places were too expensive or too far from the team facility. Finally, I found a modest studio within my budget, small but clean with decent internet and space for my gaming setup. I met the landlord there on a Saturday morning and walked through the empty rooms, calculating costs in my head. Rent, utilities, groceries, transportation. It would be tight but manageable if I was careful. The landlord seemed decent, not asking too many questions about why I was moving. I filled out the application right there and paid the deposit with money I'd been saving from tournament winnings. Getting the approval email 2 days later made it real. I had my own place, small and bare but mine. Looking at photos of the empty studio on my phone, I felt something like hope mixed with anxiety about making it work. Camelia offered to help me move in the following weekend, showing up with her truck and a toolkit. We spent the afternoon hauling boxes and assembling furniture I'd ordered cheap online. She helped me set up a practice area by the window and a sleeping space in the corner, making suggestions about routines and boundaries without being pushy. We talked about keeping practice time separate from streaming time, about building in breaks and meal prep. Her supported independence gave me confidence that I could actually maintain this setup long term. When we finished, she ordered pizza, and we ate sitting on my floor, the space feeling less empty with another person there. After she left, I sat alone in my studio and felt the quiet settle around me. Strange, but not bad. My next therapy session with Justina came a few days later. We talked about my pattern of lying to Alyssa to keep her love versus choosing honesty, even if it meant losing someone. Justina reframed it as choosing authenticity over security, asking me what kind of relationships I wanted to build going forward. The insight didn't fix everything or give me easy answers, but it shifted how I thought about being real with people. I left that session with more questions than answers, wondering if I'd ever be brave enough to just be myself from the start. Somehow that uncertainty felt right, like growth instead of resolution. That evening, Alyssa texted asking if I'd consider couples counseling to work things out. I stared at the message for a long time before typing back that I was keeping the legal separation moving forward. I tried to make my response firm but not cruel, acknowledging we both had work to do separately before we could even think about together. Her reply came fast, angry emojis and accusations that I was giving up too easily. I didn't engage further, just put my phone down and focused on other things. The boundary felt clean, even though maintaining it was hard. A few days later, I packed up a box of Alyssa's keepsakes I'd found in my stuff, things like photos and jewelry she'd left behind. I included a note owning my part in our problems, apologizing for the lying while also requesting 90 days of no contact so we could both heal. The gesture wasn't about reconciliation, just clean closure. I drove to our old apartment and left the box by her door without knocking, texting her that it was there. Driving away felt like the final step in letting go, painful but necessary. Our scrim block the following week went smoother than it had in a while. My teammates noticed my communication was steadier, my positioning more deliberate. Jake gave me a nod after one particularly good round and said my callouts were on point. The quiet confidence building in my gameplay felt earned rather than lucky, like all the work was actually paying off. I wasn't back to peak form yet, still missing shots I should make and hesitating on some decisions. But the trajectory was clearly upward, improvement I could measure and feel. After practice, I stayed late running drills, pushing myself to be better tomorrow than I was today. I spent the next afternoon building out my new life in spreadsheet form, tracking every dollar I spent and every dollar I earned from streaming and tournament winnings. The numbers looked tight but workable if I stuck to the plan. I bought a pack of meal prep containers from the discount store and spent Sunday cooking chicken, rice, and vegetables in bulk for the week ahead. The routine felt boring in a good way, like I was taking care of myself instead of just surviving. I taped a color-coded training schedule to my wall above my desk, blocking out scrim time in blue, solo practice in green, and streaming hours in yellow. Looking at the organized grid of my week made me feel like I had control over something real. Each small system I put in place built on the last one, creating structure where there used to be chaos and lies. Late that night, I sat at my desk with my journal open and started writing an apology letter to myself. The words came slowly at first, admitting where I failed by lying to Alyssa for 2 years instead of being honest about who I was. I wrote about choosing fear over truth and how that choice poisoned everything good we might have had. But I also acknowledged what I learned about boundaries and honesty and the difference between keeping someone's love through deception versus earning it through authenticity. The letter stayed in my journal, never meant for anyone else to read. I closed the notebook and read back what I wrote, feeling something like acceptance settle in my chest. I didn't need Alyssa's forgiveness or anyone else's absolution to move forward. The work was mine to do, and I was doing it. The following evening, I queued up a solo ranked match and muted every social media notification on my phone before the game loaded. I wasn't streaming or practicing for team strategy, just playing because I loved the game itself. My focus felt clear as the match started, my hands steady on the mouse and keyboard. I made callouts to strangers who became temporary teammates, coordinating pushes and covering angles like we'd played together for months. We traded rounds back and forth with the enemy team, both sides playing sharp and focused. The final round came down to a 1 versus 2 situation, and I clutched it out with careful positioning and patience. The match ended with a close win, and my teammates typed quick thanks in chat before queuing their next games. I leaned back in my chair and smiled at my screen, realizing I was building something real here. A career and a life based on honesty and boundaries and genuine passion instead of fear of rejection. The path forward looked different from I imagined 2 months ago, but it felt right in a way nothing else had in years.